On a cold December night in 1956, four young men sat around a piano in a small recording studio in Memphis and sang gospel music until 2 in the morning. Nobody had planned it. Nobody had booked the time. It had started as a session for something else entirely and had become something that none of the four of them ever fully found words for afterward. Something that Sam Phillips, who was there for part of it, said was the most purely musical thing he had ever witnessed in 30 years of working with the greatest talents of his generation. One of the four men was Elvis Presley. Another was Johnny Cash. And what happened between them at that piano on that December night began with a dare and ended with a man who had seen everything in the music business sitting at the edge of the room with his face in his hands. It was December 4th, 1956. Sun Records on Union Avenue was quiet in the way of studios between sessions. The overhead lights turned down, the equipment resting, the particular held-breath quality of a room that has been full of music and is now temporarily empty. Elvis had come in to work on something with Carl Perkins, who was recording that afternoon. Jerry Lee Lewis had shown up because Jerry Lee showed up places when music was happening and saw no reason to require an invitation. Johnny Cash arrived later with his guitar because Sam Phillips had asked him to stop by and listen to a playback. What happened next has been called the Million Dollar Quartet session, a name that came later from a newspaper headline from a photograph that a reporter took that afternoon of the four young men around the piano. The photograph shows Elvis at the keys, Carl Perkins to his right, Jerry Lee Lewis standing, Johnny Cash at the edge of the frame. It is one of the most famous photographs in the history of American music, and it captures something real about the afternoon, but it does not capture the night. The afternoon was the music the world knows about. The night is the music the world has only heard pieces of. By early evening, Carl Perkins had gone home, and Jerry Lee had wandered out for food, and Sam Phillips had gone to handle something in his office, and Elvis and Johnny Cash were alone in the studio with the piano and a guitar, and the particular freedom that comes to musicians when the formal session is over and there is nothing required of them anymore. They had known each other for 2 years by then. They were peers in the way that only a very small number of people can be peers. Both of them having come out of the same region, the same poverty, the same musical soil of gospel and country and the blues, both of them having arrived at success fast enough that neither had yet worked out what to do with it. Johnny Cash had a guitar. He started playing a gospel song, one of the old ones, a hymn from the tradition they had both grown up in. He played it quietly, not performing, just playing, the way you play something in a room when the room is the right size for it. Elvis listened. He was at the piano, not playing, just listening in the way that Elvis listened to music, with his whole body, with a quality of attention that people who played with him said was one of the most distinctive things about him. The way he received music as if it were a physical thing entering him rather than a sound passing by. After a while, Johnny looked up from the guitar and said, "Your turn." Elvis said, "What do you want to hear?" Johnny said, "Whatever you're afraid to sing." There was a silence. The studio was very quiet. The overhead lights were low. Outside on Union Avenue, Memphis went about its December business. Elvis turned to the piano. He thought for a moment. Then he started to play. What he chose was a hymn called "Where No One Stands Alone." It was not a well-known song. It was not one of the gospel standards that everyone in their world had sung since childhood. It was a quieter thing, a more personal thing, a song about exactly what it says, about the longing for a presence that stays when everything else goes, about the particular human need to not be alone in the hardest moments. Elvis had heard it somewhere years before, and it had stayed with him the way certain things stay without your deciding to keep them. He played the opening bars. Then he began to sing. Johnny Cash had heard Elvis sing many times. He had heard him sing in sessions, at shows, in the informal moments that happen between musicians when the performance is done and what's left is just the music. He thought he knew what Elvis's voice could do. He was not fully prepared for what it did that night in that room, alone, with no crowd and no performance, and nothing between the voice and the air except the truth of what was being sung. He said later, in an interview given decades afterward, when he had lived long enough to have perspective on that night, that he had heard a great many voices in his life, voices that could do things that seemed to belong to a different order of natural capability. He said Elvis Presley's voice on that December night in 1956, singing that hymn in a half-dark studio with no one listening but Johnny Cash, was the most purely beautiful thing he had heard in his life. He said he was not sure he had the right words for it, and that the inadequacy of his words was itself part of what he was trying to say. Elvis got through the first verse. He got through the chorus. He got through the second verse. And then, on the final chorus, his voice did something that it did sometimes in the gospel sessions. It opened in a way that it did not open in performance, a way that had to do with the absence of an audience and the presence instead of the music itself as the only thing in the room that mattered. It widened. It deepened. It became something that was no longer a performance of a feeling, but the feeling itself, given a voice, given the specific instrument of Elvis Presley's throat and chest, and the particular sorrow and faith that had been in him since before he could remember. Johnny Cash sat on a stool at the edge of the room while this was happening. He had his guitar in his hands. He was not playing. When Elvis finished, the room was completely silent. Johnny sat there for a moment without moving. Then he set his guitar carefully on the floor beside the stool, and he put his face in his hands. He was not crying in the way that people cry when they are sad. He was crying in the way that people cry when they have encountered something that is more beautiful than they were prepared for, something that has moved them past the place where composure is possible. He stayed like that for perhaps a minute. Then he raised his head. His face was wet. He looked at Elvis. He said, "Don't you ever stop singing that music." Elvis looked at him. He said, "I don't intend to." They played for another 2 hours. Nobody else came back. It was just the two of them in the half-dark, with the piano and the guitar and the hymns they had both learned before they learned anything else. Nobody recorded it. Sam Phillips came back at some point to check on things and saw the two of them through the glass and turned around and went back to his office, because some things you do not interrupt. The tapes from that December evening have been partially released over the years. The afternoon session, the Million Dollar Quartet material, the music that the world knows. The evening session, if it was recorded at all, has never been released. Some who were there say the tape ran out. Some say Sam Phillips chose not to release it. Some say there is no tape, and that the evening exists only in the memories of the two men who were there, and in what it became in the music they made afterward. Johnny Cash recorded Where No One Stands Alone in 1967. He cited it as one of the recordings he was most proud of. In the liner notes to the album, he wrote that his decision to record the song had been influenced by hearing someone else sing it years before in a way he had never forgotten. He did not name Elvis. He did not need to. Elvis recorded Where No One Stands Alone in 1911 as well, for the same gospel album that won him his first Grammy. The two recordings exist independently of each other, made in different studios, by two different men who had both been changed by a December night in Memphis 11 years before. There is a particular kind of music that does not exist for an audience. That is made in the spaces between performances, in the rooms that the cameras and the reporters and the screaming crowds do not reach. It is the music that musicians make for each other and for themselves and for whatever they believe in. The music that comes out when there is no reason to perform and every reason to be honest. That is the music Elvis Presley sang on a December night in 1956, alone with a guitar and a friend and the hymns that had formed him, and that is the music that made Johnny Cash put his face in his hands. Some music is too true for the world. It belongs to the rooms where it was made, and to the people who were there, and to the long echo of it in everything that came after. If this story moved you today, please take a moment to subscribe and tap that thumbs up. It helps more people find stories like this one, and it means everything to this channel. Tell us in the comments, is there a piece of music, a hymn, a song, anything that has ever moved you to tears before you had time to prepare yourself? We read every word you write. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story from 60s America Rewind. God bless each and every one of you.